Today's episode is personal. It started with something simple. An antique shop. I saw a crucifix, and I didn't buy it at first, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. So I went back and brought it. Months later, something changed. I found myself thinking about church, not out of belief, just curiosity. Did the crucifix influence me? Or did it reveal something that was already there? Please note our episodes are best experienced with headphones. You're listening to the Beyond Haunted UK podcast. Before we begin, if you enjoy these stories, please follow Beyond Haunted UK on all available podcast providers and across social media. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, over 35% of you aren't currently following, and your support generally helps the podcast grow. Now, this episode may contain themes of mental illness, trauma, human suffering, or details related to true crime. Please listen with care. My name is Jamie, this is Beyond Haunted UK, where we explore history, belief, true crime, and the unexplained through the lens of the human experience. I ask you to please listen with an open mind. Today's episode is a bit more personal. It seems like more of you are connecting with the experiences I've had, rather than the stories themselves. So I wanted to share something that's been on my mind for quite a while. Now, this isn't a case of a well-known haunting. It's something that happened to me and something I still don't fully understand. It started in an antique shop, nothing unusual about that on the surface, just a place filled with objects that have passed through other people's lives and ended up sitting quietly on shelves. And as I was looking around, I noticed a crucifix. Now, I didn't pick it up or give it much thought in that moment. I saw it, moved on, and carried on browsing. But later that day, it came back into my mind. Then again after that. It wasn't overwhelming or intense, just something that stayed with me in a way I couldn't really explain. Now, after a while, I went back and brought it. Now, not because I needed it, and not because I had any strong belief attached to it. I just couldn't seem to ignore it. There wasn't anything particularly special about it. It's not ornate or detailed, and it didn't look valuable. If anything, it's quite plain, but that didn't seem to matter. I started wearing it occasionally, and over time it became something I wore most days without really thinking about it, and I'm even wearing it now. So for a while, that's all it was, just something I owned, something that had quietly become part of my routine. But then something shifted, not suddenly and not in a way I could clearly point to. It was more gradual. I found myself thinking about church, not out of habit, but because of how I was raised. Just a quiet curiosity that hadn't been there before. And that's when I started to question it, because the timing didn't feel completely random. It seemed to follow something as simple as buying and wearing this crucifix. Now, we all know the crucifix is one of the most recognisable symbols in the world. It represents suffering, sacrifice, endurance, and for many people, protection. Even outside of religion, most people understand what it stands for. It carries meaning far beyond its physical form. We've seen it used in films, in stories, and in accounts of paranormal experiences. It's often associated with protection, with defence, with influence over something unseen. Now, whether you believe in those ideas or not, that association is difficult to separate from the object itself. But when you strip that away, you're left with something simple. A physical object shaped into a symbol, carrying meaning that has been built over time. So the question becomes, where does that meaning actually come from? One simple explanation is pretty straightforward. When something becomes part of your daily life, even in a small way, it begins to influence how you think. Not because it has any inherent power, but because your mind builds connections. The symbol becomes familiar, and that familiarity can turn into curiosity. But there's another perspective that's harder to completely dismiss. The idea that objects don't always arrive without context. That something which has been owned before, worn before, or held before might carry some sense of its past with it. Not technically in an obvious way, but enough to leave an impression. Now, I don't fully believe that, but I don't completely rule it out either. Because the experience itself is real. The shift in thought, the change in direction, that part isn't imagined. And it followed something that logically shouldn't have had any real influence at all. So I find myself somewhere in the middle of it. Not fully convinced either way, and looking at it from both sides. Maybe the crucifix didn't influence anything. Maybe it simply brought something to the surface that was already there. Maybe it gave shape to thoughts I hadn't really paid attention to before. Or maybe it acted as a kind of trigger. Not because of what it is physically, but because of what it represents. Because symbols carry weight, not physically, but in the way they exist in our minds. And once that meaning is there, it can start to shape how we think without us even noticing it happening. Now, when I think back to that moment in the shop, it doesn't feel significant in itself. It was just a small decision. But what followed is harder to explain. So did the crucifix influence me? Or did it simply reflect something that was already there? And maybe that's the real question behind all of this. Not whether the object holds power, but whether we give it power without realising it. Whether meaning comes from the object, or from us. Because I still wear it, and I still find myself thinking about it. Not because I found an answer, but because I haven't. Before you go, don't forget to follow Beyond Haunted UK on Spotify and across social media. Every follow, every share and every message helps this community grow and keeps these stories alive. As always, you'll find us wherever the strange and the spiritual meet. Thank you for listening.